Pollen is a substance produced by a seed plant, appearing as a fine dust. This usually yellowish powder is composed of numerous micropollen grains, which vary in size, shape, and structure among species. Its function is in the process of plant reproduction, which has been presented simplistically in this scheme. In flowering plants, pollen grains are produced by anthers, a bag-like structures on top of male reproductive parts called stamens. In non-flowering higher plants, such as conifers or ginkgos, pollen is produced in male cones. Lower plants such as ferns, mosses, and liverworts do not produce pollen at all since they reproduce by spores. Each pollen grain consists of at least two cells, large vegetative one and smaller generative, reproductive one embedded in that large vegetative cell. They are surrounded by a hard coat made of extremely resistant and chemically inert biopolymer sporopollenin that protects them. Due to its inert features, the exact chemical structure of sporopollenin has remained elusive. For the plant to reproduce, a pollen grain has to be transferred to a compatible female reproductive structure on another flower called pistil, or female cone, depending on the species. The transfer of pollen grains to the female reproductive structure is called pollination. This transfer can be mediated by the wind in Anemophilous plants, which literally means wind-loving plants. By water in submerged plants, whose pollen grains are usually elongated and of same density as water, allowing it to drift in the current for days without floating or sinking. And the third option of pollination is the one carried by animals, which are in most of the cases insects, so the plants that pollinate this way are called Entomophilous, which means insect-loving. Plants pollinated by wind typically produce great quantities of very lightweight pollen grains, sometimes with air sacs. Non-flowering seed plants such as these cedars typically use wind as a pollinator, while wind-pollinated flowering plants such as maize generally have unattractive flowers. Wind-carried pollen grains are commonly associated with allergies. Insect-loving plants, on the other hand, produce pollen that is relatively heavy, sticky, and protein-rich for dispersal by insect pollinators attracted to their flowers. Upon being transferred to a proper pistil by any of the previously mentioned means, the outer pollen grain protective shield will crack, and a large vegetative cell will extend as a pollen tube into the part of a pistil called style. Generative cell will follow this pollen tube to reach the ovule, which is a female reproductive cell in the ovary of a pistil. Together with ovary, ovule will, after being fertilized, further evolve into a seed and eventually new young plant. So we could say that the role of a pollen powder in plants is equivalent to the one of sperm in humans. Because of their variability, inertness, and resistance, pollen grains are useful in paleontology and forensics. Bee pollen for human consumption is marketed as a food ingredient and as a dietary supplement. Though proteins comprise 7 to 35% of pollen collected and stored by bees, the major constituent of it is carbohydrate, not protein. Besides us and bees, pollen is also consumed by other arthropods such as spiders, mites, ants, etc. And of course, fungi,